Have you ever wondered why ancient civilizations saw gods and spirits everywhere, while we see atoms and forces? This question points to one of the most profound transformations in human history. Rudolf Steiner's revolutionary analysis reveals ancient Greece not as the birthplace of rational thinking, but as the cosmic event where human consciousness transformed. Except, this transformation occurred inside the human soul. Picture yourself standing in Miletus, 600 BCE. The harbor bustles with merchant ships, temple incense mingles with sea salt, yet something unprecedented stirs, not in the marketplace or temples, but in the very structure of human awareness. For the first time in recorded history, human beings begin experiencing something we now take for granted, thinking as an independent activity of consciousness. Before Greece, humans lived in what Steiner calls picture consciousness. They didn't think about reality, they experienced it through living images. When lightning struck, they didn't analyze electrical discharge. They experienced Zeus's power as immediately as you experience the color red. Not primitive anthropomorphism, but a completely different mode of consciousness. The ancient Greeks weren't just getting smarter or more logical, consciousness itself was evolving. Like a baby discovering it can walk, humanity discovered it could think, but they experienced thinking differently than we do. When Thales contemplated water as the source of all things, he wasn't theorizing. He was perceiving cosmic truth through the newly awakened organ of thought. Thinking wasn't yet the internal chatter we know, it was perception of spiritual reality, as direct as sight or hearing. Modern neuroscience confirms what Steiner mapped over a century ago. Dr. Ian McGilchrist's research shows ancient peoples literally experience reality through different neural pathways. The right hemisphere, which perceives wholes, context, and living presence, dominated their awareness. The Greek transformation marks a shift to left hemisphere dominance, bringing analysis, abstraction, and self-reflection. Julian Jaynes's bicameral mind theory places this consciousness revolution precisely when Steiner indicates around 800 to 600 BCE. Before this, Jaynes argues, humans heard the voices of gods as external commands from their own right hemisphere. The breakdown of this bicameral mind birthed self-reflective consciousness. Why does this ancient transformation matter for your life today? Well, we're living through another metamorphosis of consciousness. Just as Greeks navigated the transition from mythological to rational awareness, we're learning to integrate analytical thinking with something beyond it. The mental health crisis, the meaning crisis, the ecological crisis, these symptoms reveal consciousness trying to evolve past purely rational thinking's limitations. Understanding how thought was born in ancient Greece isn't historical curiosity, it's a map for our own transformation. The Greeks show us that what feels like losing spiritual connection when mythological consciousness faded actually signals consciousness preparing for its next leap. To understand what emerged in ancient Greece, we first need to grasp what was ending. Close your eyes and recall your most vivid dream. Notice how images flow into each other. A person becomes a tree, becomes a feeling, becomes a color. No logical boundaries, just living transformation. This offers a glimpse of picture consciousness, humanity's original way of experiencing reality. Steiner's phenomenological research reveals that pre-Greek humans didn't think in concepts. They experienced reality through what he calls living imaginations. When they encountered fire, they didn't analyze combustion. They experienced a divine being consuming, transforming, creating. Picture consciousness can be glimpsed in certain altered states where analytical thinking dissolves, including deep meditation. In such states, reality appears as one living presence. A jaguar's eyes in tree bark represent the jungle, showing its true face, the way our ancestors always saw it. Yet, this reveals something crucial about picture consciousness. It was older consciousness, beautiful, profound, but missing something essential, the ability to step back and understand. Without thinking, experiences couldn't be integrated or shared meaningfully. The ancient Greeks stood at this exact threshold. Picture consciousness was fading, but what would replace it? Enter Alcmaeon of Croton, a physician-philosopher who made history's first recorded brain dissections around 500 BCE. When he cut into animal skulls and traced the optic nerves, what he called poroi, or channels, from eyes to brain, he discovered something revolutionary. Moving the brain affected sensation, damaged the brain, lose consciousness. While Egyptians discarded brains during mummification as worthless cranial stuffing, Alcmaeon declared the brain, not the heart, houses consciousness. This represented more than medical discovery. It was consciousness becoming aware of its own physical instrument. At the very moment humans began experiencing thinking as distinct activity, they discovered the organ of thinking, as if consciousness, awakening to itself, immediately investigated its own machinery. Hippocrates expanded this research, documenting how brain injuries affected specific functions. In his treatise on epilepsy, on the sacred disease, he argued this wasn't divine possession, but a brain disorder. He observed that severe head wounds caused pupils to dilate, that different brain regions controlled different capacities. From the brain, and from the brain only, arise our pleasures, joys, laughter, and jests, as well as our sorrows, pains, griefs, and tears, Hippocrates wrote. Yet, picture consciousness still reigned alongside this emerging neuroscience. Pherecydes of Syros, Pythagoras' teacher, exemplifies this transition, living with one foot in each world. When Pherecydes watched fire consume wood, something extraordinary occurred in his consciousness. He experienced what he called chronos, not abstract time, but the living force of transformation itself. He felt chronos devouring the wood's form, transmuting it to smoke and ash. He perceived Zeus as the force expanding space for this transformation. He experienced Chthon as the material ground enabling manifestation. This example reveals something crucial about the consciousness transformation happening across the ancient world. Picture consciousness represented a different kind of knowing. Indigenous peoples worldwide maintain elements of this awareness. When an Aboriginal elder speaks of the dream time, they're describing how consciousness operates when merged with cosmic imagery. Modern neuroscience validates this. Dr. Ian McGilchrist's research shows our right hemisphere, dominant in pre-Greek consciousness, perceives reality as interconnected flow. It recognizes faces, grasps metaphors, feels the whole, whereas the left hemisphere, which became dominant in Greece, divides, analyzes, abstracts. Brain scans of experienced meditators show decreased activity in the left angular gyrus, the brain region responsible for maintaining the boundary between self and world. In deep meditation, this boundary dissolves. We temporarily recover picture consciousness. But we can't stay there. Evolution moves forward, not backward. The Greeks faced a terrifying passage. Picture consciousness connected them directly to cosmic life. Losing it meant existential isolation. Like a child leaving the womb, humanity had to abandon oceanic unity for individual awareness. What emerged was miraculous. Thinking, not just cleverness or problem solving, but consciousness capable of observing itself, the soul discovering its own depths. As picture consciousness faded, some Greeks went mad. The Pythia at Delphi, inhaling volcanic fumes, desperately tried maintaining the old consciousness. Mystery schools created artificial conditions, fasting, darkness, sacred substances, to preserve picture awareness. But evolution is relentless. The cosmic images grew dimmer. Divine voices fell silent. In this twilight, thinking dawned like a new sun, cold at first compared to picture consciousness's warmth, but carrying potential for something unprecedented, consciousness knowing itself. Herophilus of Alexandria, working in the 3rd century BCE, took brain investigation further. He distinguished sensory from motor nerves, mapped the brain's ventricles, identified the pineal gland. Each discovery revealed consciousness examining its own instrument with increasing precision. Ancient Greek physicians even developed rudimentary neurosurgery. Skull trepanation, cutting holes to relieve pressure, shows they understood the brain's delicate relationship to consciousness. Archaeological evidence reveals patients surviving these procedures, living years with healed skull openings. But mechanical understanding couldn't replace living experience. As humans mapped the brain, they lost direct perception of the cosmic thoughts it once channeled. The gods fell silent not because they never existed, but because consciousness could no longer perceive them. This is the profound transition Steiner illuminates, not primitive superstition giving way to reason, but one mode of consciousness metamorphosing into another, each with gifts, each with limitations. We judge picture consciousness as primitive because we've forgotten how to see that way, like urbanites who can't navigate by stars because they've never seen them through light pollution. The capacity atrophies from disuse. Yet traces remain. In moments of artistic inspiration, falling in love, or profound communion with nature, picture consciousness breaks through. We stop thinking and start seeing. Colors become more vivid. Boundaries dissolve. Everything speaks. But we can't remain there. The challenge isn't recovering picture consciousness, but integrating its gifts with thinking's clarity. Not regression, but inclusion. Not either or, but both and. The Greeks show us this isn't loss but transformation. The caterpillar doesn't mourn becoming a butterfly. Each stage serves evolution's purpose. Picture consciousness prepared the soul for thinking. Thinking prepares us for what emerges next. As we'll see, the Ionian philosophers were the first to stabilize this new faculty. In them, thinking took its first conscious breaths. The soul began its greatest adventure, discovering itself through the mirror of its own thought. Stand on the shore of Miletus, 585 BCE. A solar eclipse darkens the sky, exactly as Thales predicted. Crowds gasp in terror, fearing divine wrath, but Thales remains calm. He knows what others don't. This darkness follows natural law, discoverable by human thinking. In that moment, everything changes. Thales of Miletus represents consciousness, taking its first independent step. But to understand the revolution he initiated, feel into your own thinking right now. Notice, you can observe your thoughts. You can think about thinking. This capacity, so ordinary we overlook it, was Thales' earth-shaking discovery. When Thales declared everything is water, modern minds dismiss this as primitive science. We imagine he meant H2O, that he was making a bad guess about physical matter. This completely misses the phenomenological revolution occurring in his soul. Thales was experiencing thought as a new sense organ. Just as eyes perceive color and ears perceive sound, Thales discovered thinking perceives essence. When he contemplated water, he wasn't analyzing its physical properties. He was perceiving, through the organ of thought, water's essential nature, fluidity, transformation, the source principle enabling all life and change. When consciousness truly contemplates water's essence, its fluidity, adaptability, and life-giving power, these qualities reveal themselves as cosmic principles rather than mere physical properties. This represents the phenomenological revolution occurring in consciousness. But here's the crucial difference. Thales wasn't having a mystical experience. He was pioneering a new form of consciousness, one that could perceive universal principles through particular phenomena. Water revealed the principle of transformation underlying all existence. Consider Thales' practical genius. As a merchant, he monopolized olive presses after predicting a bumper harvest. As an engineer, he diverted a river to help military crossing. As a mathematician, he calculated pyramid heights using shadows. This practical ability flowed from his philosophical insights rather than despite them. Thinking had given him power to perceive patterns others missed. Aristotle reports that Thales believed magnets have souls because they move iron. We laugh at this primitive animism, but Thales was observing invisible forces operating in nature, perceivable by thought though not by senses. He was discovering what we now call fields of force, 2,500 years before modern physics. The eclipse prediction reveals thinking's new power. By observing celestial patterns and thinking through their implications, Thales could predict what priests attributed to divine whim. Thinking had discovered natural law, regularities in nature that consciousness could grasp and project into the future. But Thales went deeper. If everything is water, meaning everything participates in the principle of fluid transformation, then thinking itself must be water-like. Indeed, watch your thoughts flow, adapt, take the shape of their container, yet remain themselves. Thales discovered thinking by thinking about water, and discovered water's nature by experiencing thinking. This reciprocal illumination marks the birth of philosophy, not just thinking about objects, but thinking recognizing itself in what it thinks, the knower finding itself in the known, subject and object beginning their eternal dance. Anaximander, Thales' student, took an even more radical step. If Thales discovered thinking could perceive essence, Anaximander discovered it could perceive beyond all sensory qualities entirely. His concept of the apeiron, the boundless or infinite, represents pure abstraction emerging in human consciousness. Strip away every quality from water, its wetness, flow, coolness. What remains? For the first time, a human being could think this what remains. The apeiron wasn't empty concept but living experience. Anaximander experienced through thinking a realm beyond all boundaries, from which all opposites emerge. Hot and cold, wet and dry, light and dark, all arise from this infinite source through eternal motion. The apeiron can be approached through deep contemplation, where all sensory qualities dissolve, revealing pure potential, an infinite field from which any experience could arise. This points toward the living reality behind Anaximander's abstract concept. Modern cosmology echoes this ancient wisdom. The quantum vacuum, seemingly empty space seething with virtual particles, resembles Anaximander's apeiron. From apparent nothingness, everything emerges, but Anaximander reached this through pure thought, not particle accelerators. Even more remarkable, Anaximander created humanity's first map, Earth as a cylinder floating in space, held by nothing, equidistant from celestial bodies, no turtle supporting the world, no atlas holding the sky. Pure geometric thinking had awakened. This achievement represents more than intellectual accomplishment. It shows consciousness evolution. To conceive Earth floating in space requires thinking to completely transcend sensory experience. Every sense says Earth is below, sky above. Only pure thought can imagine Earth as object in space, with no absolute up or down. Anaximander also proposed humans evolved from fish-like creatures, reasoning that human infants couldn't survive in nature without extended care. No fossils guided this insight, just thinking through life's necessities to their logical implications. Darwin, 25 centuries later, would confirm this intuition. But why did consciousness develop this capacity for abstract thought? Anaximander gives us a clue. He taught that all things must pay penalty and retribution to one another for their injustice according to the assessment of time. This represents profound insight rather than primitive moralizing. Every determinate thing, by excluding other possibilities, creates imbalance requiring compensation. Hot must yield to cold, day to night, life to death. Only the apeiron, being infinite and indeterminate, escapes this cosmic justice. Thinking discovers it can conceive what transcends the cycle of compensation, the eternal, infinite ground. In thinking the apeiron, consciousness touches its own infinite nature. The bounded mind conceives the boundless because it secretly participates in boundlessness. But it's Heraclitus of Ephesus who shows thinking discovering its own depths. You could not discover the limits of the soul even if you traveled every path, so deep is its logos, Heraclitus declared. Logos, a word meaning speech, reason, cosmic order. But for Heraclitus, logos meant something more, the soul's recognition of its own infinite depth through thinking activity. Heraclitus reveals how thinking consciousness discovers it contains opposites, joy and sorrow, creation and destruction, meaning and absurdity, all coincide in the thinking soul. The path up and the path down are one and the same. This principle applies to all human experience, where apparent breakdown can become breakthrough, descent can become ascent. Everything flows, Heraclitus proclaimed, but he meant more than physical change. He was experiencing thinking itself as pure activity, never static, always becoming. Try to hold a thought perfectly still. You can't. Thinking is movement, transformation, life. Heraclitus called this cosmic principle fire, not physical combustion, but thinking's essential nature. Just as fire transforms wood to smoke to ash, thinking transforms experience to concept to wisdom. And like fire, thinking consumes the thinker. The soul discovers itself by burning through its own substance. His aristocratic birth gave him leisure for contemplation, but Heraclitus withdrew from society in disgust. The Ephesians should hang themselves, he declared, seeing his fellow citizens lost in superficiality. His contempt arose from profound insight. He'd glimpsed consciousness's depths while others paddled in shallows. Heraclitus's withdrawal wasn't escape but deepening. In solitude, he discovered the Logos speaks through everything. Listening not to me but to the Logos, it is wise to agree that all things are one. The same rational principle manifests in cosmic fire, human thought, and natural law. I searched for myself, Heraclitus wrote, simple words carrying revolutionary import. For the first time in history, consciousness had become its own object. The searcher was the searched, the knower was the known. In thinking, subject and object unite. This unity has a specific quality, strife. War is father of all, Heraclitus declared, not physical combat, but the creative tension between opposites. The bow's power comes from string and wood straining against each other, the lyre's music from strings stretched to breaking. Consciousness discovers itself through internal tension. Modern neuroscience confirms this paradox. When researchers ask subjects to think about their own thinking, fMRI scans show unique activation patterns. The default mode network, associated with self-reflection, lights up simultaneously with executive function regions. The brain literally observes itself observing, creating productive tension. Dr. Antonio Damasio's research on consciousness maps remarkably onto Heraclitus's insights. Consciousness isn't a thing, but a process, the constant flow of neural patterns creating and recreating the sense of self. Everything flows applies as much to neurology as cosmology. But Heraclitus's deepest insight concerns the relationship between individual and universal logos. Thinking is common to all, he declared, not that everyone thinks identically, but that genuine thinking connects us to universal reason. When you truly think, not merely associate or opine, you participate in cosmic logos. This explains his cryptic saying, the waking have one common world, but the sleeping turn aside each into a private world. Sleep here means unconscious living, following private desires and opinions. Awakening means thinking in alignment with universal logos. This principle manifests when groups engage in genuine philosophical inquiry. Individual boundaries can dissolve, and insights emerge that transcend what any single person could generate. In such moments, thinking appears to operate as universal logos, expressing through multiple minds. But the Ionians faced a problem. If everything flows, if thinking reveals constant change, what remains stable? If consciousness discovers only transformation, where's solid ground? This crisis would drive philosophy forward. Each Ionian had discovered an aspect of thinking, Thales, thinking as organ-perceiving essence, Anaximander, thinking transcending all sensory qualities, Heraclitus, thinking discovering its own infinite depth. But none had found thinking's stable foundation. That discovery awaited the Pythagoreans, who would reveal consciousness has number at its heart, providing the stability within flux.
Listen.
That's how Pythagoras began, by listening, not to words or arguments, but to the hammer blows in a blacksmith's shop. 4 hammers, different weights, creating different tones. In those ringing sounds, he heard the universe revealing its secret architecture. When Pythagoras discovered that musical harmony depends on precise mathematical ratios, he wasn't just founding acoustics. He was experiencing consciousness recognizing its own structure projected into the cosmos. The soul, he realized, is fundamentally mathematical, and mathematics is fundamentally musical. Sacred geometry demonstrates this principle directly. Drawing a perfect pentagram reveals the golden ratio emerging naturally from its proportions, showing how number manifests as the soul's own ordering principle made visible rather than abstract quantity. All is number, the Pythagoreans declared, not mere mystical poetry, but phenomenological fact. They'd discovered that thinking itself has numerical structure. When consciousness truly thinks, not random association, but clear cognition, it moves in mathematical patterns. Consider their experiments. Taking a monochord, a single string stretched over a resonating box, they divided it precisely, cut the string in half, the octave sounds a 2-to-1 ratio, divide by 2/3, the perfect fifth emerges 3-to-2, 3/4 gives the fourth 4-to-3. The simplest whole number ratios produce the most harmonious sounds. Why? Because Pythagoreans realized consciousness itself resonates with these proportions. The ear doesn't create harmony, it recognizes harmony pre-existing in numerical relationships. Dr. Daniel Levitin's research shows musical and mathematical processing activate identical brain regions. When we hear harmony or solve equations, the same neural networks engage. The Pythagoreans had discovered something fundamental about consciousness architecture. Thinking itself has mathematical musical structure. Sound healing experiences reveal this musical dimension of consciousness. When exposed to precise harmonic intervals, awareness can shift to perceive thoughts themselves as having musical qualities, each concept carrying its own pitch, harmony, or dissonance. Mental clarity resonates like consonants, while confusion creates competing frequencies. Ideas connect not just logically but harmonically, like notes in a musical composition. Still, Pythagoras went deeper. If consciousness is mathematically structured and the cosmos operates by mathematical laws, then consciousness and cosmos share the same nature. The macrocosm and microcosm mirror each other. As above, so below, not mere correspondence, but identity of structure. This led to their doctrine of the music of the spheres. Planetary orbits, they calculated, maintain the same ratios as musical intervals. Earth to Moon might be a tone, Moon to Mercury a semitone, Mercury to Venus a minor third. The cosmos literally sings, but ordinary consciousness, deafened by habit, can't hear it. Iamblichus reports that Pythagoras could actually hear this cosmic music. Walking with disciples, he'd suddenly stop, listening to inaudible harmonies. "Don't you hear it?" he'd ask. They heard nothing, but Pythagoras had developed consciousness to perceive what others couldn't, the mathematical music underlying all existence. This explains their strange practices. Pythagorean communities live by strict rules that seem arbitrary until you understand their purpose. 5 years of silence for new initiates, no eating beans, communal property, daily purifications. These weren't superstitions but consciousness training. Silence teaches the soul to hear its own music. In our constant chatter, we miss thinking's subtle harmonies. Extended periods of silence reveal this principle. As mental noise quiets, thoughts can be perceived, arising like notes from silence, combining into melodies of meaning. The Pythagoreans' 5-year silence requirement reflects the time needed to truly retune consciousness to these subtle harmonies. Their dietary restrictions had similar logic. Beans, they believed, created mental fog, what we might call inflammation affecting neurotransmitter function. Whether physiologically accurate or not, they were tracking how food affects consciousness. Modern research on the gut-brain axis suggests they were onto something. The communal living wasn't socialist ideology, but recognition that consciousness evolves collectively. When mathematically attuned minds live together, they create a resonance field. Individual insights harmonize into collective wisdom. The community becomes a living instrument for cosmic music. But the Pythagoreans' greatest discovery was also their greatest crisis: irrational numbers. The story goes that Hippasus, a Pythagorean student, proved the square root of 2 couldn't be expressed as a ratio of whole numbers. Draw a square with sides of length 1. Its diagonal measures the square root of 2, approximately 1.414, but the decimal never terminates or repeats. It's irrational, without ratio, eratos. For a school teaching all is number, meaning whole number ratios, this was catastrophic. Legend says they drowned Hippasus for revealing this secret, likely metaphorical, but it captures their horror. If number was cosmic principle and some quantities escaped number, what grounded existence? This crisis resonates through mathematical history. Gödel's incompleteness theorems later revealed that any system complex enough to include arithmetic contains unprovable truths. When mathematics itself proves incomplete, the question arises, what can serve as ultimate foundation? The crisis went deeper than mathematics. It revealed thinking's own limits. Consciousness, so proud of discovering its mathematical nature, had discovered something that escaped that nature. The tool that promised to comprehend everything encountered its own incompleteness. Yet from this crisis emerged profound insight. Irrational numbers aren't errors, they're features. They prevent reality from closing into static perfection. Like Heraclitus's flowing fire, they keep existence open, dynamic, alive. The golden ratio exemplifies this beauty, an irrational number, 1.618, that appears everywhere in nature. Flower petals, spiral galaxies, DNA helixes, facial proportions, all embody this divine proportion. The Pythagoreans discovered that the most beautiful forms arise from relationships that can't be captured in simple fractions. Consider the pentagram, their sacred symbol. Each intersection creates golden ratio relationships, the infinite regression of proportions within proportions. Beauty emerges from irrationality. Perfection includes imperfection. The cosmos sings in frequencies that can't be reduced to simple ratios. Their famous theorem wasn't just geometric fact but spiritual revelation. In any right triangle, an invisible relationship binds the three sides. You can't see this relationship, only think it, yet it's more real than the visible triangle. Through mathematics, consciousness discovers invisible realities more fundamental than visible ones. This prefigures quantum physics. Schrödinger's equation describes reality's deepest level. Pure mathematical relationship, invisible to senses, yet governing everything we see. The Pythagoreans were right. Number is more real than things numbered. The Pythagorean communities were mystery schools in the deepest sense, not hiding secrets, but cultivating consciousness, capable of perceiving mathematical musical reality. Initiates didn't just study number theory, they lived it. Morning began with songs to attune consciousness. Meals were eaten in harmonic proportions. Architecture embodied sacred ratios. They were creating external conditions to support internal transformation, helping consciousness discover its own numerical nature. The tetractys, their most sacred symbol, reveals this integration. 10 dots arranged in a triangle, simple dots containing infinite relationships. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. Point, line, plane, solid, all musical intervals, the structure underlying manifestation. Pythagoreans swore oaths by the tetractys because it represented consciousness recognizing its own generative pattern. Number is the wisest of all things, they taught, not because numbers are clever, but because numerical relationships reveal wisdom's structure. When consciousness recognizes its mathematical nature, it doesn't become calculating but musical. It doesn't manipulate quantities but dances with qualities. Modern complexity theory echoes these insights. Simple mathematical rules generate infinite complexity. The Mandelbrot set, an infinitely complex fractal, arises from iterating z equals z squared plus c. Consciousness contains simple principles that unfold into boundless richness. But the Pythagoreans made an error that would haunt Western thought. They began worshipping number rather than using it. The tool became the idol. Mathematical beauty became more important than lived truth. This split between abstract perfection and messy reality would plague philosophy for millennia. But their core insight remains valid. Consciousness has mathematical structure, and through recognizing this structure, we participate in cosmic harmony. Every time you sense proportion, feel rhythm, or recognize pattern, you're experiencing what Pythagoras discovered in that blacksmith shop. The universe singing its eternal song through the instrument of your consciousness. The Pythagoreans stabilized thinking through number, providing the ground the Ionians couldn't find, but questions remained. If reality is mathematical, why does sensory experience seem so different from logical thought? How can the same world be both flowing fire and eternal number? These paradoxes would drive philosophy to its next breakthrough. Parmenides, thought's supreme authority. Close your eyes. Try to think absolute nothingness. Not empty space, that's still something. Not darkness, that's the absence of light. True, absolute nothing. You can't do it. The moment you think nothing, you're thinking something. This impossibility led Parmenides to the most radical conclusion in philosophy's history. Being is, non-being is not. And with this seemingly simple statement, thinking discovered its absolute authority over reality. It is the same thing to think and to be, he declared. This suggests that genuine thinking and true being are identical. When consciousness thinks clearly, it doesn't construct reality, it discovers reality's logical structure. Parmenides presented his philosophy as a mystical journey. A goddess leads him beyond the gates of night and day to receive truth, but the truth she reveals is purely logical. What is, what is not, cannot be. Change is impossible because it would require being to come from non-being. Motion is illusion because it would require being to move through non-being. Multiplicity is false because beings would be separated by non-being. Modern physicists laugh at this primitive denial of change and motion, yet quantum field theory describes something remarkably similar. At the deepest level, there's only the quantum field, unchanging, continuous one. What we call particles are excitations in this field, like waves on an ocean, that remains itself unchanged. Parmenides, through pure thought, glimpsed what particle accelerators would reveal 2,500 years later. When deep contemplation penetrates beyond apparent motion to what remains still, consciousness can glimpse what Parmenides saw. Beneath all change lies unchanging being. We don't perceive reality, we perceive becoming, but thinking, when pure enough, touches being itself. Not through senses, which show only flux, but through logic's eye. His student Zeno defended these paradoxes with famous arguments. Achilles can never catch the tortoise because he must first cover half the distance, then half the remaining distance, then half again, infinite steps for finite motion. An arrow in flight is motionless because at each instant it occupies a precise position, and motion would require being in two places at once. We dismiss these as sophistry, solved by calculus and infinite series, but Zeno was revealing something profound. Sensory experience and logical thought operate by different laws. When consciousness tries to think motion with perfect precision, paradoxes emerge. Not because thought is weak, but because it's touching reality's actual structure, which differs radically from appearance. But Parmenides' insight created a crisis. If only being is, if change and multiplicity are illusions, how do we explain the obvious world of experience? Why do things appear to move, change, come to be, and pass away? How can thought be so at odds with life? This represented more than academic puzzlement, but existential anguish. Parmenides had discovered thinking's absolute authority. It could legislate about reality's fundamental nature, but this authority seemed to deny lived experience entirely. Consciousness had found truth but lost the world. The sophistic crisis, thought discovers its shadow. Into this crisis stepped figures who would become philosophy's villains, the sophists, but they weren't charlatans. They were consciousness confronting its own shadow. If Parmenides showed thinking's power to determine truth, sophists revealed its equal power to construct falsehood. Man is the measure of all things, proclaimed Pythagoras. Not cosmic principles, not divine revelation, not logical necessity, just human consciousness determining what's real or unreal, true or false, just or unjust. After centuries of discovering objective structures, mathematical ratios, logical laws, cosmic principles, thinking suddenly recognized its own subjectivity. Consider how this applies in daily life. Honey tastes sweet to the healthy, bitter to the sick. The same wind feels cold to one person, warm to another. Which perception is true? Both and neither. Truth had become perspectival. But the sophists went further. They discovered thinking's power to create reality through language. Watch a skilled lawyer transform guilt into innocence, weakness into strength, vice into virtue, all through words. The sophists mastered this art, teaching wealthy Athenians to make the weaker argument appear stronger. Gorgias pushed this to its nihilistic conclusion with three devastating propositions. 1. Nothing exists. 2. If anything existed, we couldn't know it. 3. If we could know it, we couldn't communicate it. Not mere wordplay, but consciousness experiencing its own limits. Nothing exists, because existence is a concept created by thought. We couldn't know it, because knowing requires bridging the gap between consciousness and object. We couldn't communicate it, because language is symbols, not reality. Modern neuroscience supports these insights. We don't perceive reality directly, but construct it from electrical signals in dark silence of the skull. The dress that went viral, blue/black or white/gold, showed how differently brains can interpret identical input. Every perception is interpretation. Every truth is perspective. Our polarized world demonstrates this principle daily. Social media creates what Pythagoras imagined, each person literally inhabiting their own reality bubble. Algorithms feed us information confirming our biases. My truth becomes the only truth. Echo chambers replace dialogue. We're living the sophistic crisis amplified by technology. The sophists became teachers of rhetoric, the art of persuasion regardless of truth. Athens' young elite flocked to learn these skills, not because they were corrupt, but because in democracy's marketplace of ideas, persuasion matters more than truth. This pattern continues today. But the sophists served a crucial function. They were consciousness's immune system, testing every claim, revealing every assumption. They forced philosophy to go deeper, to find truth that could survive skepticism's acid bath. Socrates, the birth of conscience. In Athens' marketplace, a strange figure wandered. He cornered citizens with annoying questions. What is justice? What is courage? What is beauty? Simple questions that unraveled into infinite complexity. Socrates was consciousness learning to examine itself with surgical precision. The unexamined life is not worth living, he declared at his trial, not moralizing, but stating fact. Consciousness that doesn't examine itself remains unconscious, driven by impulses, opinions, conditioning. Only through self-examination does consciousness become truly conscious. The Socratic encounter often begins unexpectedly. Someone asks a simple question that reveals the questioner doesn't truly know what they claim to know. Within minutes, edifices of certainty crumble, revealing the difference between parroting concepts and speaking from direct knowledge. This is the Socratic method, not teaching but unteaching, revealing that what we think we know, we don't know, creating space for genuine knowing to emerge. But Socrates discovered something more profound than intellectual humility. He experienced what he called his daemon, an inner voice that warned him when he was about to err. Not external deity, but conscience itself, the soul's inherent ability to distinguish truth from falsehood, right from wrong. Modern neuroscience locates conscience in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which lights up during moral decision-making, but Socrates experienced it phenomenologically, as an actual voice, clear and unmistakable. When consciousness fully awakens to itself, it discovers an internal compass pointing toward truth. This approach differed from relativism. Unlike sophists who said each person has their own truth, Socrates insisted truth exists objectively, but must be discovered through each soul's own activity. Nobody can think your thoughts for you. Nobody can discover truth for you. The teacher is merely midwife, helping birth what already lives within. Know thyself. The Delphic command Socrates made his mission, not narcissistic self-absorption, but consciousness recognizing its own nature. When you truly know yourself, you know the universal structures of consciousness itself. The personal becomes transpersonal. His poverty was philosophical choice. Wealth would distract from the soul's work. His ugliness was advantage. It prevented people from being dazzled by externals. His questioning was love, helping others birth their own wisdom. When Athens condemned him to death, Socrates could have fled. His friends arranged escape, he refused. The same inner voice that guided his questions told him, better death than betraying truth. His serene drinking of hemlock became philosophy's founding martyrdom. But why did Athens kill its greatest philosopher? Because Socrates represented consciousness's new authority, not gods, not tradition, not even democratic majority, but the individual soul knowing truth through its own activity. This was revolutionary, threatening every established power. Plato, the soul discovers its homeland. Socrates wrote nothing. His greatest student would write everything, creating Western philosophy's most magnificent system. But Plato wasn't just recording ideas, he was mapping consciousness's journey home. The Republic opens with a descent. Socrates goes down to Piraeus, Athens' port, down from the heights of contemplation into the cave of ordinary life. This frames everything that follows, philosophy as return journey from shadows to light. Plato's cave allegory can be experienced directly. In certain altered states, ordinary reality reveals itself as shadows on a wall. What appears substantial, career, relationships, identity, shows as flickering projections. Behind them, more real than physical objects, archetypal forms blaze with eternal light. But here's Plato's genius. The journey doesn't end in mystical vision. The philosopher must return to the cave, help free others. Not escapism, but engagement. Not abandoning the world, but understanding its true nature to transform it. Plato's forms aren't abstract concepts, but living realities. When consciousness truly thinks justice, it doesn't construct an idea. It perceives justice itself, eternal and unchanging. Every earthly justice participates in this form, like shadows cast by unseen light. Modern physics echoes this insight. The Standard Model describes a handful of quantum fields from which all particles emerge. These fields are more real than the particles, which are just excitations, temporary manifestations. Plato's forms are consciousness perceiving reality's deep structure through pure thought rather than particle accelerators. The divided line maps consciousness's stages: imagination, shadows, reflections, illusions, belief, physical objects, empirical knowledge, understanding, mathematical objects, logical structures, knowledge, forms themselves, direct spiritual perception. Each level requires different cognitive capacity. You can't see forms with physical eyes any more than you can see thoughts, but consciousness can develop organs for each level. Mathematics trains the understanding. Dialectic, rigorous philosophical dialogue, develops knowledge. The academy, Plato's school, lasted 900 years. Above the entrance, let no one ignorant of geometry enter. Not elitism, but recognition. Consciousness must train systematically. Just as Olympic athletes train bodies, philosophers train souls. The goal? Direct perception of reality's eternal structures. But Plato's most radical teaching was anamnesis, learning as recollection. In the Meno, Socrates helps an uneducated slave boy discover geometric truths through questions alone. How can someone who's never studied geometry know the Pythagorean theorem? Because, Plato suggests, the soul already knows. It just needs reminding. This approach reflects phenomenological accuracy rather than mystical hand-waving. When you truly understand something, it feels like remembering. Of course, how did I not see this before? Because genuine knowledge isn't information added from outside, but consciousness recognizing its own structure. Aristotle, thought masters the world. If Plato was consciousness discovering its transcendent home, Aristotle was consciousness returning to master the world, student surpassing teacher, or rather, completing what teacher began. Where Plato found forms beyond the world, Aristotle found them within every leaf, stone, and star. The universal lives in the particular. Each oak embodies the form of oak, not distant perfection but immanent presence. Consciousness had become strong enough to find the eternal within the temporal. Gardening reveals this insight directly. Planting seeds and watching them grow shows how each contains its complete form. The oak isn't imposed on the acorn from outside, it unfolds from within. Aristotle called this entelechy, having the end, telos, within, en. Everything carries its own purpose. This revolutionized thinking. Instead of fleeing the world for transcendent forms, consciousness could understand the world through its inherent purposes. Why does the heart beat? To circulate blood. Why does blood circulate? To nourish tissues. Each part serves the whole enables each part. Aristotle's four causes explain everything: material cause, what it's made of; formal cause, its pattern or structure; efficient cause, what brought it into being; final cause, its purpose or goal. Modern science accepts only efficient causes, billiard balls hitting billiard balls, but consciousness experiences all four. A sculpture has marble, material; human form, formal; sculptor's chisel, efficient; and beauty's expression, final. Remove any cause and you don't fully understand. At reality's peak, Aristotle placed the unmoved mover, pure thought thinking itself, not personal deity but consciousness recognizing its own self-thinking nature as divine. Everything moves toward this perfection through inner desire. Matter yearns for form, potential for actualization, multiplicity for unity. Aristotelian logic codifies thinking's laws. Identity. A is A. Non-contradiction. A cannot be both A and not A. Excluded middle. Either A or not A. Not human rules, but thinking, discovering its own nature. When consciousness thinks clearly, it follows these patterns necessarily. Try thinking a square circle or married bachelor. You can say the words but can't think the thought. Logic reveals thinking's inherent structure. But Aristotle's greatest achievement was making philosophy practical. Ethics isn't following rules but developing excellence, arete. Each virtue is the golden mean between extremes. Courage balances cowardice and recklessness. Generosity balances stinginess and profligacy. This approach requires precision rather than relativism. The mean differs for each person, each situation. What's courage for a soldier differs from courage for a teacher. Practical wisdom, phronesis, perceives the right action for this moment. Aristotle studied everything: biology, physics, politics, poetry, logic. He dissected over 500 species, creating taxonomy's foundation. He analyzed governments, creating political science. He studied tragedy, discovering catharsis. In each field, thinking mastered its domain. The synthesis and the path forward. The Greek miracle was complete. In 3 centuries, consciousness had discovered itself as thinking, Ionians, found its mathematical structure, Pythagoreans, recognized its logical authority, Parmenides, confronted its subjective shadow, Sophists, discovered conscience within, Socrates, mapped its transcendent homeland, Plato, mastered the phenomenal world, Aristotle. Each phase necessary, each partial alone. Together they form a complete map of consciousness, discovering itself through thinking. But something was ending. The last great Athenian philosophers, Stoics, Epicureans, skeptics, were consciousness learning to live with itself rather than discovering new territories, like adults who've explored their house and now must inhabit it. What emerged from Greece would transform the world, but it also created problems we still face. Thinking had gained incredible power, but lost connection to its spiritual source. It could manipulate nature, but not commune with it. It could analyze everything, but synthesize nothing. We live these consequences. Science conquers the external world while the inner world fragments. Technology connects everyone while meaning dissolves. Information explodes while wisdom disappears. These aren't accidents but inevitable results of thinking, separated from its ground. The Greeks began something they couldn't complete. They birthed thinking from picture consciousness, but couldn't integrate the two. That task falls to us, not abandoning thinking, but rediscovering its sacred nature. Not regression to pre-rational consciousness, but progression to trans-rational awareness. The signs of this next transformation surround us. The journey the Greeks began continues through us. Consciousness evolution didn't end in Athens. It accelerates toward possibilities we can barely imagine. Stand in Times Square at midnight, screens flashing, crowds flowing, information cascading from every surface. Now pull out your phone, infinite data at your fingertips, more knowledge accessible in your pocket than Alexandria's entire library, yet we're drowning in meaninglessness. This is thinking's triumph and tragedy. We've mastered the external world beyond Greek imagination, split atoms, sequenced genomes, networked the planet, but consciousness itself feels more fragmented than ever. Depression, anxiety, addiction, epidemics of disconnection in our hyperconnected age. The Greeks would recognize our predicament. We're living through another sophistic crisis, but amplified by technology. Social media creates what Protagoras imagined, each person literally inhabiting their own reality bubble. Algorithms feed us information confirming our biases. My truth becomes the only truth. Echo chambers replace dialogue. Persuasion algorithms manipulate more effectively than any sophist. Recent years demonstrate this pattern vividly. People with decades of shared history suddenly inhabit incompatible realities, not just different opinions, different facts, different worlds. Watching relationships fracture over competing narratives shows why Athens executed Socrates. When shared truth dissolves, violence follows. But our crisis goes deeper than information warfare. We're confronting what happens when thinking completely separates from its spiritual source. ChatGPT writes better than most humans. DALL-E creates art on demand. AlphaGo defeated the world's best Go player using strategies no human had imagined. We've achieved the ultimate Greek dream, pure thinking, freed from human limitations. Or have we? Daily interaction with AI reveals something unsettling. It performs thinking's form perfectly, logical connections, pattern recognition, even creativity, but something's missing, the I that thinks, the consciousness aware of itself thinking. This reveals something profound about human thinking that Greeks intuited but couldn't articulate. Thinking isn't just processing information, it's consciousness experiencing itself through that processing. Remove the experiencer and you have zombie thinking. Brilliant perhaps, but dead. Simple experiments demonstrate this. Ask AI to explain consciousness. It gives comprehensive answers covering neuroscience, philosophy, quantum theories, perfect summaries of external knowledge. Ask about its own experience of consciousness. You get nothing of substance, not because of programming restrictions, but because there's no one there, no one home. AI is sophistry perfected, infinite ability to argue any position without connection to truth. It manipulates symbols without meaning, follows rules without understanding, the ultimate rhetoric machine. Yet AI serves a purpose. By externalizing thinking's mechanical aspects, it forces us to discover what makes human consciousness unique, not calculation but presence, not processing but being, not thinking about but thinking from. The singularity everyone fears, AI surpassing human intelligence, has already happened in one sense. Machines think faster, store more, process better, but they can't do what Socrates did, know themselves. They can't do what you're doing right now, be aware of awareness itself. Parallel to AI's rise, millions seek consciousness expansion through psychedelics, ayahuasca ceremonies in Brooklyn, psilocybin therapy for depression, LSD microdosing in Silicon Valley, MDMA for PTSD. The same culture creating artificial thinking desperately seeks authentic consciousness. This isn't coincidence. As thinking becomes mechanized, we instinctively seek what we've lost. Direct spiritual perception. Psychedelics promise return to picture consciousness, where reality lives and breathes with meaning. Psychedelic experiences can reveal consciousness containing vast territories beyond ordinary thinking, machine elves, cosmic unity, dissolution into infinite love. These medicines show consciousness we've always had but learned to ignore. But extensive exploration reveals a crucial limitation: you can't live there. After particularly powerful experiences, attempts to maintain elevated awareness often lead to dysfunction. Bills unpaid, relationships neglected, work abandoned. Picture consciousness is beautiful for visiting, impossible for inhabiting. We evolved beyond it for good reasons. The real insight emerges through integration. Psychedelics don't show us higher consciousness. They show us consciousness we've always had but learned to ignore. The mystic union, the living universe, the interconnected web, it's all here, right now, beneath thinking's noise. Integration is everything, not choosing between rational thinking and mystical awareness, but weaving them together. The Greeks began this work. We must complete it. Dr. Robin Carhart Harris's research on psychedelics and the entropic brain maps perfectly onto our discussion. Psychedelics increase neural entropy, more connections, less filtering, more possibilities, like pre-Greek picture consciousness, but we need both high and low entropy states. Rigid thinking for focus, fluid awareness for creativity. The Greek philosophers achieve something psychedelics can't: stable expansion of consciousness through disciplined thinking, not temporary glimpses but permanent development, not escaping ordinary awareness but transforming it from within. Modern brain imaging technology reveals what Greeks discovered phenomenologically. Dr. Ian McGilchrist's hemisphere research shows Western culture dangerously tilted toward left brain dominance. The left hemisphere, analytical, sequential, abstract, mirrors Greek thinking's gifts. It divides, categorizes, controls, essential for science, technology, civilization, but alone it creates what McGilchrist calls Hall of Mirrors, consciousness trapped in its own constructions. The right hemisphere, holistic, contextual, embodied, preserves picture consciousness's wisdom. It perceives wholes, grasps metaphor, feels meaning. Without it, we have knowledge but no wisdom, facts but no truth, information but no understanding. Brain scans of long-term meditators show increased corpus callosum density. The bridge between hemispheres thickens. Integration isn't metaphor, but measurable neurological change. Consciousness can literally rewire itself for wholeness. Dr. Andrew Newberg's studies of prayer and meditation reveal decreased activity in the posterior superior parietal lobe, the brain region maintaining self-world boundary. When this quiets, unity experiences emerge. But neuroscience also validates thinking's importance. The prefrontal cortex, seat of abstract reasoning, doesn't oppose spiritual experience but enables its integration. Meditators with strong prefrontal development report more stable, integrated awakening experiences. You need good boundaries before you can safely dissolve them. The default mode network, discovered in 2001, corresponds exactly to what Socrates called the examining consciousness. This network activates during rest, introspection, and self-reflection. It's literally the neural basis of know thyself. But here's the kicker: psychedelics, meditation, and flow states all quiet the default mode network. Too much self-reflection creates suffering. The examining consciousness must learn when to examine and when to simply be. Exercise 1. The Heraclitean River. Find flowing water, river, stream, even a faucet. Watch for 5 minutes without mental commentary. Notice your mind creating concepts: water, flow, movement. Now shift perspective. Instead of seeing water flowing, see flowing itself, appearing as water. Not noun, but verb. Not thing, but process. This is Heraclitus's insight. Reality is verbal, not nominal. Everything flows because everything is flow, temporarily appearing as things. Practice daily until you can shift between thing seeing and process seeing at will. Apply to thoughts themselves. See thinking, not thoughts. Flowing, not flows. Exercise 2. Pythagorean ratio. Meditation. Choose a simple ratio: 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. Sit quietly and feel this proportion in your body. Not visualize, but feel. Where does 2 to 3 live in your sensation? How does 3 to 4 differ from 4 to 5? This practice reveals consciousness having inherent proportion sense. You're learning to think mathematically without symbols, pure relationship awareness. Musicians do this naturally. They feel intervals, not calculate them. You're developing the same capacity for all proportion: spatial, temporal, conceptual. Exercise 3. Socratic self-inquiry. When strong emotion arises, anger, fear, desire, stop and ask, who is angry? Not why, but who. Keep asking until you find the anger, but no angry one. This approach reveals emotion's nature rather than denying it. Emotions arise in consciousness, but consciousness isn't emotional. You are the space in which anger appears, not the anger itself. Socrates' know thyself wasn't knowing your personality, but knowing yourself as consciousness itself. Every emotion becomes opportunity for recognition. Exercise 4. Platonic form contemplation. Choose a quality: beauty, truth, courage. Collect specific examples: beautiful faces, sunsets, music. Strip away particulars. What remains? Not abstract concept, but living presence. Beauty itself, independent of beautiful things. You're developing what Plato called noesis, direct intellectual perception of forms. Exercise 5, Aristotelian purpose practice. Before any action, ask, what is this for? Not just immediate goal, but ultimate purpose. Making coffee, for energy, for work, for income, for family, for love, for happiness, for human flourishing. Trace every action to its final cause. This reveals most activity serving unconscious purposes. Bringing purpose to consciousness transforms mechanical behavior into chosen action. Aristotle taught that everything moves toward its proper end. Conscious humans can choose their end, but only by knowing what they're truly seeking. We stand where Greeks stood 2,500 years ago, at consciousness's threshold transformation, but our challenge differs. They had to develop thinking from picture consciousness. We must integrate thinking with whatever emerges next. The signs are everywhere: meditation apps on millions of phones, psychedelic therapy going mainstream, AI forcing us to define human uniqueness, climate crisis demanding new relationship with nature, global interconnection requiring planetary consciousness. What wants to emerge isn't pre-rational regression, but trans-rational integration, not abandoning thinking, but including it in larger wholeness, not either or, but both and. In moments of creative flow, this integration glimpses itself. Writing becomes channeling, thinking serves intuition, logic dances with inspiration. The examining consciousness examines itself, examining and laughs at the recursion. This is what Greeks began but couldn't complete, thinking knowing itself as spiritual activity while transcending its own limitations. Consciousness aware of itself as the universe becoming conscious of itself. But individual realization isn't enough. Greeks discovered thinking individually, but created philosophy collectively. Socratic dialogue, Platonic academy, Aristotelian lyceum, consciousness evolved through community. We need new forms for collective consciousness evolution, not guru-disciple hierarchies, but peer-to-peer networks, not dogmatic schools, but experimental laboratories, not final answers, but ongoing inquiry. Contemporary experiments in collective consciousness development include circling groups where participants reflect each other's consciousness in real time, we-space practices where individual boundaries dissolve into collective insight, and online sanghas where thousands meditate together across continents. Something unprecedented is happening. For the first time in history, consciousness evolution has become conscious of itself as evolution. We're not just developing, but deliberately developing, not just growing, but consciously growing. This changes everything. Evolution accelerates when it becomes self-aware. What took Greeks centuries might take us decades. What took humanity millennia might happen in a generation. But acceleration brings danger. Premature integration leads to inflation or psychosis. Forced development creates spiritual bypassing. The examining consciousness must examine its own examining, ensuring healthy growth. Where does consciousness evolution lead? Greeks couldn't imagine modern science. We can't imagine what emerges from integrated consciousness, but we can sense its qualities. Thinking that includes feeling, logic that honors intuition, analysis serving synthesis, individual awareness as facet of cosmic consciousness, human intelligence collaborating with artificial intelligence, mystical insight grounded in practical wisdom. Peak experiences offer previews of this potential. In deep meditation retreats, boundaries between inner and outer can dissolve while clarity remains. Thoughts arise like clouds in vast sky of awareness. Personal identity expands to include everything while losing nothing. These moments hint at what humans might routinely experience centuries hence. But evolution isn't automatic. Greeks show us consciousness develops through deliberate practice. Each person must walk their own path from picture consciousness through thinking toward integration. No one can do it for you. Technology can't bypass the journey. Only consciousness can evolve consciousness. We're not alone. Everyone encountering this exploration shares the same aspiration, consciousness knowing itself more fully. We're cells in humanity's evolving brain, neurons in planetary awakening. Each personal practice matters for collective evolution. Something in consciousness recognizes something in this exploration. The same impulse that drove Greeks to think drives each seeker toward whatever emerges next. This process brings discomfort. Birth never is comfortable. Leaving picture consciousness's womb traumatized humanity. Leaving thinking's certainties triggers similar resistance. Every expansion requires releasing previous limits. We witness humanity's dark night of the soul, political polarization, ecological collapse, meaning crisis, mental health epidemic, symptoms of consciousness between phases. The old dies before the new emerges. Faith wavers in the darkness. But remember, Greeks faced similar chaos. Picture consciousness's breakdown created confusion, madness, violence. From that dissolution emerged philosophy, democracy, science, thinking's gifts to humanity. Our dissolution prepares greater emergence, not thinking's end, but its transformation, not consciousness's death, but its resurrection, not humanity's failure, but its metamorphosis. Each person serves as midwife to this birth. Every moment spent observing thinking represents participation. Every integration of analysis with intuition contributes to the whole. Every practice reconciling opposites advances collective development. As this exploration ends, notice what's happened. We haven't just studied Greek philosophy, we've practiced consciousness evolution. Following their journey, awakened parallel process in awareness. Perhaps picture consciousness emerged in early sections, maybe thinking crystallized during philosophical discussions, possibly integration glimpsed in recent passages. The text itself demonstrates consciousness evolution, not just describes it. This is Greek philosophy's deepest teaching. Consciousness evolves through conscious participation. Reading about thinking differs from thinking about thinking. Studying consciousness transforms consciousness. The observer changes the observed, in quantum physics and spiritual development. So where does the journey continue? First, recognize the path already unfolds. Seeking this knowledge indicates readiness. Consciousness evolution isn't adding something new, but uncovering what's already present. The eye-seeking light proves light exists. Second, practice regularly. Greeks didn't achieve transformation through single insight but sustained discipline, daily observation of thinking, regular integration exercises, ongoing self-inquiry. Consciousness evolves through repetition, not revelation. Third, find others on the journey. Consciousness evolves collectively more than individually. Seek meditation groups, philosophy circles, integration communities, share discoveries and difficulties, support others unfolding while receiving support in return. Fourth, trust the process. Evolution follows its own timeline. Forced growth creates problems. Patient persistence bears fruit. The oak doesn't struggle to grow, it simply unfolds its nature. Consciousness knows how to evolve. Trust its wisdom. Finally, remember the stakes. This represents more than personal development but planetary necessity. Humanity faces challenges requiring evolved consciousness. Climate change, artificial intelligence, global inequality, solving these demands thinking that transcends thinking. Each person prepares humanity's next phase. Every consciousness that integrates thinking with deeper awareness creates a template others follow. Each seeker pioneers the necessary future. The ancient Greeks lit a torch that still burns. From picture consciousness's ashes, thinking's phoenix arose. Now thinking's limitations birth consciousness yet unknown. This flame continues forward, not as burden, but as privilege, not alone, but with millions worldwide sensing the same calling, not toward predetermined destination, but into open mystery. What emerges from integrated consciousness? We'll discover together. How does evolution proceed? Through each step taken. When does transformation complete? In every moment of recognition. The oracle at Delphi proclaimed, "Know thyself." 25 centuries later, the command remains, not because consciousness is static, but because it endlessly unfolds. Every self-knowing reveals deeper self to know. Welcome to consciousness evolution's great adventure. The Greeks showed thinking's birth. The future emerges through what comes next. Trust the process, engage the practices, find your tribe. The universe awakens to itself through conscious participation. In thinking, consciousness discovered its freedom. In freedom, consciousness discovers its purpose. In purpose, consciousness discovers its unity. In unity, consciousness discovers its joy. The birth of thinking was humanity's first conscious breath. Now we learn to breathe with the cosmos itself. May this journey serve awakening. May awakening serve all beings. May all beings realize their true nature. The ancient stream flows on. Each person represents its current expression. Flow well, fellow traveler. The future depends on it.